He was the brightest among the stars of mankind, and the most beloved of all its sons. Horus Lupercal. The name once carried the weight of triumph and unity, not treachery and ruin. To speak it aloud in the Great Crusade was to invoke loyalty, courage, and the undying glory of the Imperium's advance. But every name that rises in fire casts a shadow equal to its light, and this story begins at the very height of that blinding radiance on the day Horus was named Warmaster. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble beneath the banners of the Emperor. Millions of worlds burned with the fires of conquest, not as destruction, but as purification, a rebirth under the golden standard of terror. The Legiones Astartes were the hammer of this new age, and among them, one rose above all others, the Lunar Wolves. Horus stood before his legion in the hollowed silence of the vengeful spirit's grand assembly hall. The walls were alive with the pulse of machinery, sacred runes glimmering faintly, echoing hymns of ancient triumphs. When the Emperor approached, every space marine bowed in reverence, for even demigods kneel before divinity. And then, before the sons of the Imperium, the Emperor spoke, "From this day forth, let it be known that Horus Lupercal, my son, shall bear the mantle of Warmaster. In him I see the reflection of my will, and through him my light shall reach the darkest corners of the stars." A storm of cheers erupted, metallic voices clanging like iron bells in the Cathedral of War. Yet in that thunderous moment, there was one sound that no one heard: the faint whisper of destiny tightening its noose. The title of Warmaster was more than honor. It was a crown of fire. For years, Horus had been the Emperor's favored son, the first found, the most trusted, the one who could bridge godlike command with brotherly warmth. His laughter could inspire loyalty as easily as his fury could silence entire worlds. And yet, within him burned a pride too pure to be called ambition, but too fierce to be left unguarded. In the days that followed his ascension, Horus walked among his brothers, the Primarchs, with the weight of both glory and suspicion pressing upon his shoulders. Some offered their congratulations sincerely, others less so. Fulgrim, ever the aesthete, embraced him with honeyed words about destiny and beauty. Lorgar whispered of divine favor. Angron only grunted, a predator acknowledging another. And somewhere, behind their words and smiles, jealousy coiled like a serpent waiting for warmth. Horus himself could feel it, that strange and subtle distance between him and his father. The Emperor had returned to Terra, withdrawing from the front lines of the crusade to focus on his secret project. None were told its true nature. Even Horus, the Warmaster, was left in the dark. That silence festered. At first, he told himself it was faith in his father's infinite wisdom. But each day, as he stared at the endless void between the stars, he began to wonder. Why had the Emperor left him to bear the burden alone? Why had he not shared his purpose, his vision, his trust? Doubt, once born, does not sleep. And yet, Horus still led with brilliance unmatched. The Great Crusade flourished under his command. Entire sectors bent the knee. Lost human colonies were reunited with the Imperium. His name became legend, the Warmaster, the unbroken spear of mankind. But in the quiet hours between campaigns, when the blood was washed away and the banners lowered, the weight of the crown began to whisper. The men who followed him, mortal and immortal alike, began to worship not the Emperor but Horus. They called him the Son of the Father's Light, and in their voices was an adoration that the gods themselves might envy. He dismissed it, at first, yet part of him listened. In the privacy of his command sanctum aboard the vengeful spirit, Horus often stood before the hollow map of the galaxy, a web of stars stretching endlessly, each one a conquest, a scar, a memory. He would whisper to himself, "We bring unity to the stars, and still, the light grows dim." He remembered the Emperor's words, once so full of purpose, "You are my weapon, my will made flesh." But what does a weapon become when it is no longer wielded? What is a son, if his father's gaze no longer falls upon him? There, in that silence, the seed was planted, not by chaos, not yet, but by the very nature of man's pride. When the Warmaster next addressed his legion, his voice carried the gravity of thunder. "My brothers," he said, standing upon the command dais, the crimson light of battle screens painting his armor in shades of blood and gold. "The Emperor's work is not yet done. He has entrusted us with his dream to bring mankind to its rightful dominion among the stars. We shall not falter, we shall not tire, we shall be the storm that ends all storms." The legion roared in unison. It was devotion, it was faith, it was worship. And in that roaring ocean of loyalty, Horus felt something dangerous stir something divine and hollow at once. He began to see himself not merely as an extension of his father's will, but as the interpreter of it. A small difference in thought, and yet it would birth a war that would consume the stars themselves. Later, alone, Horus removed his helmet and stared at his reflection in the darkened visor. His own eyes, amber and sharp as a predator's, stared back at him. He saw the warrior, the leader, the chosen. But behind that face, he glimpsed something else. A question, a shadow. He thought of his brothers, each scattered across the void, fighting in their own crusades. He thought of the Emperor, silent on terror, hidden behind veils of secrecy. And in that moment, Horus Lupercal, Warmaster of mankind, whispered words that would echo through eternity. "If he would not stand beside me, then I must learn to stand above him." It was not defiance yet, not rebellion, merely a thought faint as a breath, soft as the whisper of the warp. But in the grim vastness of the galaxy, even whispers can become storms. Thus began the Age of Doubt. An era born not from hatred, but from love twisted by distance. Horus still believed in his father's dream, but he began to believe that only he could save it. And that is how damnation always begins in the Imperium of man, with the most righteous of intentions. And somewhere, deep within the Immaterium, unseen eyes turned toward the new Warmaster and smiled. For the galaxy had found its chosen son, and chaos had found its doorway. There is a silence that follows victory, a silence heavier than war. For Horus Lupercal, that silence became a companion more constant than any brother. The galaxy, once alive with the thunder of the Great Crusade, now spoke to him in echoes. Every triumph seemed to fade faster than the last, and every world conquered felt just a little more hollow. He had been crowned as the Warmaster, the chosen heir to the Emperor's dream, yet with every new conquest, the words of his father grew fainter in his memory. Where once the Emperor stood beside him radiant, commanding, infallible, now there was only the distant shimmer of terror, unreachable behind veils of duty and secrecy. And though Horus was loved by billions, there was a loneliness in him that no legion could fill. The Lunar Wolves continued their campaigns with unmatched ferocity. On the ash-swept world of Genna 9, Horus led his sons into the heart of rebellion. Bolt of fire thundered across blackened plains. Orbital bombardments turned cities into molten glass. When the smoke cleared, the banners of the Imperium stood unchallenged once again. To the mortal generals who served beneath him, Horus was divine, the perfect union of strength and mercy. He walked among his warriors not as a god, but as a father. He laughed with them, praised them, fought beside them, and when one of his men fell, Horus would kneel in the blood and whisper the warrior's name, ensuring it would never be forgotten. It was not just love they felt for him, it was devotion. But even love, in excess, becomes a poison. After Genna 9, the Warmaster gathered his captains in the Strategium. The holographic stars shimmered like dying embers above them, hundreds of systems awaiting compliance. "The Emperor entrusted this crusade to us," Horus said, his voice deep and steady, carrying the gravity of divine command. "He remains on Terra to build the foundation of the Imperium's future. Until he returns, we are his hand, his fire, his will." His captains roared their assent. Yet when the council ended and the banners were dismissed, Horus lingered in the darkness of the hall. His gauntleted hands rested upon the edge of the hololithic map, tracing the Emperor's expansion lines across the stars. He whispered, barely audible, "He remains, while I am sent to fight and bleed." In that whisper was the first fracture. There were others who saw it and who fed it. Erebus of the Word-Bearers was among the first to notice the shadow in Horus's eyes. He approached the Warmaster with words dipped in reverence and venom. "You carry the Emperor's dream, my lord," he said softly. "But dreams are fragile things, and what is the worth of a father's love when he abandons his sons to the void?" Horus silenced him with a glare, but the words stayed. Erebus knew that truth better than anyone. Faith, once wounded, never heals cleanly. Later that night, in the sanctum of his quarters, Horus opened the last message he had received from Terra weeks old, encoded in the sigil of the imperial palace. The emperor's voice spoke not with warmth, but with command. "My son, I have entrusted you with all that I have built. Continue the crusade in my name. Terra must remain silent while I complete the final stage of my work. Do not seek me until it is done." No blessing, no farewell, just the cold tone of a distant god. Horus listened to it 3 times, then crushed the data scroll in his fist until sparks bled from the circuitry. In the weeks that followed, the lunar wolves became a storm without a center. Horus fought harder than ever, as if drowning his thoughts in war. His campaigns grew more brutal, more absolute. He spoke of the Emperor less, of victory more. Each conquered world became another stone upon an invisible altar, built not for the Emperor, but for the Warmaster himself. The mortals began to notice. They built shrines in his image. They prayed to him before battle. And while his captains cautioned moderation, Horus allowed it not out of pride, but because it filled the hollow place the Emperor's absence had left behind. Still, in the quiet hours, he felt the weight of what he had become. He remembered the day his father raised him above all others. The Emperor's eyes, bright as suns, had met his own and said, "You are my strength, Horus, my bridge to the future of man." But now that bridge felt abandoned, left to crumble under the endless march of conquest. It was Loken, the voice of reason, who once dared to confront him. "My lord," Loken said quietly aboard the vengeful spirit, "the men speak of you as if you were divine. Some say you outshine even the Emperor. I fear their faith is becoming misplaced." For a long moment, Horus said nothing. Then he turned, and his expression was unreadable. "If their faith in me strengthens their faith in the Imperium," he said, "then let them believe what they must. I serve the Emperor's vision. That will never change." But the conviction in his words was already fading. In the dreams that haunted him, Horus saw visions the Emperor cloaked in golden light, walking alone through endless corridors of machinery. But when Horus called out to him, the Emperor never turned. Instead, from the edges of the dream, came whispers soft, soothing, filled with sorrow. "He left you, beloved son. He fears your strength. He hides his truth from you. Why do you still serve a master who sees you only as a tool?" Horus awoke, drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding like the drums of war. He wanted to dismiss it, the lies of exhaustion, the noise of the warp, but deep down, he knew those whispers echoed thoughts he already feared to admit. One night, he stood upon the viewing deck of his flagship, gazing out into the void. Billions of stars shimmered like the souls of the fallen. "Father," he murmured, voice trembling not with weakness, but with the weight of doubt. "Why do you no longer walk beside me?" No answer came, only the silence of the cosmos, infinite and uncaring. Behind him, the distant hum of the ship's engines echoed like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the Imperium itself, relentless, unfeeling, eternal. And in that moment, Horus Lupercal, hero of humanity, son of the Emperor, began to feel something new, not hatred, not rebellion, but the cold, bitter ache of abandonment. It was the shadow that falls after every triumph, the quiet before every fall. And far beyond the veil of reality, in the realm where thought becomes power, the dark gods of the warp stirred, for they had scented the first wound in the Warmaster's soul. There is a moment, between loyalty and betrayal, when the heart still believes it is righteous. For Horus Lupercal, that moment stretched across stars. He did not choose treachery, not at first. It chose him, in the silence between orders, in the dreams that bled into waking. The great crusade raged on, but within the Warmaster, something had begun to rot, unseen, unspeakable, and inevitable. The campaign upon murder had ended in victory. The alien threat was annihilated, the planet cleansed, and the lunar wolves celebrated as heroes once more. But the glory of the day could not pierce the shadows gathering in Horus's mind. In his command, sanctum aboard the vengeful spirit, he stared into the void through the panoramic viewport. The stars, once bright, now felt like 1,000 eyes cold, watching, judging. He remembered his father's last words to him, months ago. I must trust you to lead where I cannot. Trust. A word so heavy it could break a man. But what was trust, if it was given only to be abandoned? The first whispers came like echoes from his own thoughts. They spoke in his voice, mirrored his fears, soothed his pride. You lead in his name, and yet he withholds the truth from you. He created you to conquer, yet shackled your destiny beneath his light. You are not a servant of the Emperor Horus. You are his equal. He dismissed them at first, calling them hallucinations born of exhaustion. Yet the more he ignored them, the clearer they became. They spoke not as demons, but as companions, gentle, rational, sympathetic. Sometimes, when the ship drifted through the warp, he would feel their presence more strongly. A warmth behind his eyes, a faint vibration in his bones. The feeling of being watched by something vast, patient, and hungry. It was Erebus who gave those whispers form. The chaplain of the word-bearers had long lingered in Horus's circle, always courteous, always reverent, always one step behind. His devotion to the Emperor was legendary, or so it appeared. One evening, as the fleet prepared for a new campaign, Erebus approached the Warmaster under the pretext of offering counsel. His words were soft, measured, calculated. "My lord," he began, bowing deeply, "there are those who say the Emperor seeks to ascend beyond us all, that he has turned from his sons to pursue divinity for himself." Horus's gaze hardened. "Blasphemy. Forgive me, Lord. I speak only of what others whisper. Yet if it were true, if the Emperor means to abandon his mortal children, would not that make our faith misplaced?" For a long moment, Horus said nothing. His armor hissed softly as the life support systems cycled. The candlelight of the strategium flickered, casting shadows across his face, shadows that seemed almost alive. "You speak dangerously, Erebus," Horus said finally. "Danger, my lord," Erebus replied with a faint smile, "is the only path to truth." He left then, bowing low, leaving behind a silence that felt far louder than any argument. In the following days, Horus found himself thinking of those words more often than he cared to admit. He began to notice what had always been there: the contradictions, the secrecy, the quiet arrogance of the imperial truth. The Emperor had forbidden worship yet demanded obedience equal to it. He had crushed gods, only to replace them with himself. Was he not, in truth, becoming the very thing he despised? The thought disgusted Horus, but also fascinated him. It was on the desolate world of Davin that destiny took shape. The planet was a wasteland of rot and ruin, once human, now fallen to disease and corruption. When a rebellion broke out there, led by a former imperial governor gone mad, Horus insisted on leading the assault personally. Loken had tried to dissuade him. "My lord, Davin is beneath your attention. Let the captains handle it." Horus only smiled. "If my sons die on that soil, then so shall I." Perhaps he sought glory, perhaps absolution, or perhaps somewhere in his soul he felt the pull of something far older. The assault began at dawn. The air was thick with the stench of decay. From orbit, the planet looked diseased, its continents pulsing with infection. When the lunar wolves descended, they found not men, but things once human, now swollen and rotting, their flesh a parody of life. The battle was swift but brutal. In the heart of the corruption stood a temple, alien in architecture, older than human memory. Horus entered it with his honor guard, driven by an impulse he could not name. Inside, beneath a vaulted ceiling of bone and brass, they found an altar, and upon it, a blade. It was no ordinary weapon. Its surface shimmered like liquid shadow, drinking in the light. Erebus was there, waiting. "A relic of ancient power," he said reverently, "a weapon against the enemies of man." Horus felt something in the blade, a pulse, like a heartbeat. Against his better judgment, he reached out. The instant his fingers brushed the metal, the darkness leapt. Pain. Unending. He fell, roaring, as the weapon pierced his armor and sank into his flesh. His warriors dragged him out, screaming for aid, but even as his body was carried away, his soul was already slipping beyond the veil. They laid him upon the Medicae slab aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The ship's apothecaries worked without rest, but their tools failed. The wound festered with a sickness no medicine could touch. His breathing slowed, His skin turned ashen, his heartbeat faltered. And then he died. For 3 days, the Warmaster of the Imperium lay silent, his soul wandering through the shadows between worlds. And there, in that abyss, the whispers returned, no longer faint, no longer human. Horus, beloved son, you have been betrayed. He would cast you aside as he cast aside his other children. The voice was neither male nor female, neither lie nor truth. It spoke in the rhythm of his own thoughts, soothing and terrible at once. It showed him visions: the emperor enthroned in gold, proclaiming himself a god, his brothers kneeling in worship, humanity enslaved to the will of one. You alone see the truth, the voice said. You alone can save mankind from his tyranny. And in the darkness, Horus Lupercal wept not in fear, but in revelation. When he awoke, the fever was gone, his wound had healed, but his eyes no longer held the light of loyalty. The Warmaster had returned from death, and something within him had stayed behind. Something that whispered still. They said that the moon of Davin stank of death long before Horus set foot upon it. Even from orbit, the Warmaster could see its surface crawling with decay, vast continents of filth and ruin, where rivers flowed thick as pus and clouds hung low like diseased lungs. It was not a place fit for men. It was a graveyard wearing the illusion of life. And yet, destiny waited there. For all his brilliance, Horus did not yet understand that some worlds are not meant to be conquered, they are meant to consume. The rebellion upon Davin had been small, insignificant by the standards of the Great Crusade. A planetary governor had turned against imperial authority, his armies twisted by plague and madness. To most, it was a matter unworthy of the Warmaster's attention, but Horus chose to descend in person. He called it duty. Others called it pride. I will not send my sons where I will not go, he said to his council. Let no man say the Warmaster hides behind his title. Gaviel Loken hesitated. My lord, Davin is tainted. There are rumors, things that live beneath the swamps. Let us cleanse it from orbit. But Horus only smiled, a weary, beautiful smile that held both affection and finality. Loken, my son, faith is not proven from the safety of the heavens. And so, the Warmaster descended. The air of Davin was thick, almost viscous, filled with spores that glowed faintly in the darkness. Every step sank into mud that pulsed like diseased flesh. The lunar wolves marched in silence through this necrotic mire, their armor smeared with filth, their senses choked by interference. They came upon villages where the dead walked swollen, blistered shapes that once bore the faces of men. The air was filled with a sound like endless breathing, the planet exhaling rot. Horus led from the front, his armor gleaming even beneath the sickly light. Each swing of his claw tore through abominations that hissed his name as if in reverence. Horus, beloved son, he waits for you below. At first, he dismissed the voices as tricks of the wind, but deep down, a part of him listened. They reached the heart of the corruption by dusk, a valley of rusted spires and sunken temples, half swallowed by the swamp. At its center stood a structure unlike any imperial architecture. Its walls were grown, not built. The material seemed to breathe. Erebus was waiting at the gate. His armor was smeared with the same filth, but his voice was calm, even reverent. My lord, he said, the traitor governor hides within. The emperor's justice must be done. Something in his tone struck Horus as strange, too composed, too certain. But there was no time to dwell. The lunar wolves advanced, bolters roaring, and entered the temple. Inside was darkness, lit only by the red glow of malfunctioning Auspex lamps. The floor was wet, slick with something that moved when they stepped on it. The air smelled of copper and rot. Then came the governor, or what remained of him. Once a proud man of the Imperium, the governor of Davin now stood as a monstrous parody, bloated, swollen, his flesh crawling with eyes. From his mouth issued not words, but a chorus of whispering voices, layered and ancient. You should not have come, son of the emperor, the thing said. He will abandon you, as he abandoned us. Horus's fury was immediate. I serve the emperor's truth. You serve lies. He raised his weapon, and the creature smiled. In that instant, a wave of invisible force struck. The world seemed to twist inward. Horus stumbled, his vision filled with light and shadow, and in that chaos he felt a blade pierce his side. It was not a mortal wound, it was something deeper, something spiritual. He fell. The last thing he saw was Erebus's silhouette, standing still amidst the madness, head bowed in false mourning. They carried the Warmaster back to the vengeful spirit under skies filled with lightning. His blood, black and shimmering like oil, stained the soil of Davin. For days, the ship's apothecaries worked without rest. Every instrument failed. Every attempt to stabilize him only worsened the wound. It wept a lightless ichor that corroded metal and flesh alike. When they finally declared him beyond their help, Astartes wept. It was then that Erebus came again. He spoke softly to the gathered captains. "There is a way," he said. "The priests of Davin serve powers older than time. They can heal him. Their rituals are ancient, forbidden, perhaps, but they can reach where science cannot." Loken refused immediately. "You would bring witchcraft aboard the Warmaster's ship. Heresy." But others, desperate and grieving, were willing to believe. Abaddon, Horus's first captain, nodded grimly. "If it saves him, we have no choice." And so it was done. They brought Horus's body back to the surface of Davin, to that same temple where the wound had been struck. The apothecaries were dismissed. The air was thick with chanting. The priests of the serpent cult began their work. Erebus stood beside them, his face serene, his eyes burning with quiet triumph. The ritual lasted 7 nights. On the 7th, the warp itself stirred. The boundary between flesh and spirit shattered. Horus's body lay still, but his mind had fallen into a sea without stars. He dreamed of a throne of gold, vast and radiant, upon which his father sat unmoving, not a man, but a god of metal and flame. He saw legions kneeling before that throne, worshipping. He saw humanity enslaved to the will of one. And in the darkness beyond the throne, something watched him. It took the shape of understanding. It spoke with the voice of pity. "You were made to serve, Horus, yet you are greater than the one who made you. The Emperor hides the truth. He would become a god and abandon you. But we offer freedom, power, the love he denied you." Horus tried to resist. He shouted into the void, calling upon his father's name, but no voice answered. Only silence. Only betrayal. When the Warmaster awoke, his eyes were not the same. Gone was the warmth that once drew men to him. In its place burned a terrible clarity, the cold conviction of one who believes he has seen the truth of all things. He rose from the altar, the wound gone, his voice calm. "The Emperor has lied to us," he said, "and I will tear his empire down to prove it." Those who heard him wept, for they did not yet understand what had been born that night. The man who had once been the Imperium's brightest sun had risen again as its executioner. And the cursed moon of Davin, its hunger sated, sank into silence once more. "He tells us that gods do not exist," Horus continued, his voice rising. "Even as he builds a throne to make himself one, he preaches unity, yet hides the truth from those who shed their blood for his dream. He claims to love us as sons, yet he abandons us to die alone among the stars." The chamber was utterly silent. Only the low hum of the ship's engines filled the air. Tens of thousands of warriors stood unmoving, their armor reflecting the faint, sickly light that now surrounded their Warmaster. "I have seen the truth," Horus said, his tone softening. "In death, I beheld what he hides from us all. There are powers in this galaxy older than man, older even than the Emperor's lies. They do not enslave, they reveal. They showed me the future that awaits humanity under his rule. Endless submission, worship without understanding, a god in chains made of gold." His gaze swept across the ranks of his sons, Abaddon, Loken, Aximand, Torgadon, each transfixed by the weight of his words. "I will not allow that future. I will not see humanity shackled to a throne." He stepped forward, the echo of his boots like thunder. "We were created to free mankind from ignorance. We have bled for that dream. But now I see we must free it from the Emperor himself." Gasps spread like sparks in dry grass. Even the most loyal among them could feel something vast unfolding, a tide that could not be turned back. "I will not kneel to a god who lies," Horus declared. "I will become the truth he fears." The words reverberated through the hall like the tolling of a funeral bell. Later, when the Council of the Mournival met in private, the air between them was electric with disbelief. Abaddon spoke first, his tone cold but reverent. "My lord, you have seen the Emperor's betrayal with your own eyes. Tell us what must be done, and we will do it." Loken looked at him in horror. "Abaddon, listen to yourself. The Warmaster speaks as if he would rise against the Emperor. This is madness." Horus turned to him, calm, gentle, almost fatherly. "My son," he said, "madness is believing that blind obedience is virtue. You saw terror before the crusade began. You saw the poverty, the suffering. Do you think such chains are gone? They remain only gilded now, draped in the Emperor's false light." "You're being deceived," Loken insisted, stepping closer. "Something poisoned you on that world. Whatever you saw, it wasn't truth." Horus's expression hardened, though his voice remained steady. "Truth is never pure, Loken. It is made of pain and revelation. You will understand, in time." He turned away. The conversation was over. That night, aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the Warmaster stood alone in the Strategium. The galaxy spread before him in ghostly light, tens of thousands of stars, each afire waiting to be snuffed out or reborn. He stared at it in silence. The voices that had once whispered in the dark were quiet now. They no longer needed to persuade. They waited, patient, confident, triumphant. And within the stillness of his mind, Horus spoke not to them, not even to himself, but to the Father he believed had forsaken him. "You made me strong so that I might carry your dream, but strength breeds its own will. You left me to rule in your stead, and I have learned that a ruler must sometimes destroy his teacher." He placed a gauntleted hand over the map of the galaxy. The light flickered as though recoiling from his touch. "You call yourself the Emperor of mankind," he murmured. "I will show you what it means to rule man." The following day, the fleet prepared to depart Davin. The priests of the serpent cult were gone, vanished like mist at dawn, but their work endured in the heart of the Warmaster. Before launch, Erebus approached him one last time. "You have been reborn, Lord," the chaplain said, bowing low. "The path ahead will be hard. You will be hated, hunted, but in the end, all will understand your purpose." Horus looked at him, and for a brief moment, there was doubt in his eyes, an echo of the man he had been. "You speak as if you know my fate." Erebus smiled. "Your fate was written before you were born. We have only cleared the dust from the words." Horus said nothing. He turned his gaze back to the void. As the fleet broke orbit, Davin dwindled behind them, an infected moon sinking into darkness, its corruption sealed beneath clouds. But the infection had already spread. Not through plague, not through rot, but through belief. The Warmaster was no longer the Emperor's son. He was the galaxy's chosen heretic, the one who had seen through the veil. And somewhere, deep within the warp, the gods of chaos laughed. Their whispers no longer needed to seduce him. The Warmaster's own voice would carry their will. He had seen the serpent's dream and believed it truth. And that dream, terrible, radiant, eternal, would soon become the galaxy's waking nightmare. When Horus Lupercal awoke upon the Vengeful Spirit, it was as though the universe itself held its breath. The ship's Medicae bays were silent, lit only by the pale glow of bioluminescent runes. Apothecaries and battle chaplains stood frozen, their lenses locked on the figure before them, the Warmaster, risen from death. He sat up slowly, his movement deliberate, regal. The wound that had defied every art of healing was gone, replaced by skin unmarked and smooth as polished marble. Yet there was something different in the air, an invisible weight that made even the Astartes uneasy. The eyes of Horus no longer gleamed with the warmth that had once drawn the love of legions. They burned now with the cold clarity of revelation, like twin suns seen through the void of space. "Leave me," he said softly. Even whispered. His voice carried the gravity of a command that none dared question. The Medicae obeyed without hesitation, retreating like shadows before dawn. When the chamber was empty, Horus rose to his feet, his armor repaired, cleansed, almost gleaming, waited on a rack beside the slab. Piece by piece, he donned it again. Each plate sealed with a hiss, each rune flaring briefly with light, until the man who had died upon Davin stood reborn. But beneath that polished exterior, something else looked out from behind his eyes, something vast, ancient, and waiting. The door opened, and the Mournival entered his most trusted sons, Abaddon, Aximand, Torgadon, and Loken. They had come expecting grief, perhaps even madness. None were prepared for what they saw. Abaddon spoke first, falling to one knee. "My lord, you live." "I do," Horus replied, his tone calm, almost serene. "And more than that, I see." Loken's gaze flickered uneasily. "What do you see, my lord?" Horus turned toward the viewport, where the void stretched endlessly dark, patient, eternal. "The truth, the lie that has bound us all." He looked back at them, and even his closest sons felt a tremor of dread. "The Emperor is not what he claims to be. He is not our father. He is not mankind's savior. He is its jailer." Silence fell like a blade. Even Abaddon, fierce, loyal, unyielding, hesitated. "You speak blasphemy, my lord," Loken said softly, his voice trembling. "No, my son," Horus said, almost gently. "I speak revelation." He took a step closer. "All our lives, we believed the Emperor sought to free humanity. But he builds an empire of obedience, not of freedom. He forbids faith in the gods because he would become one himself." "That's not true," Loken snapped. "You know him, you fought beside him." For the first time, anger cracked through Horus's calm. "I knew a man who inspired me, who promised unity and truth. But he has become something else, something that hides behind light and speaks of love while building a throne of lies." His voice echoed through the chamber, resonating like the pulse of the warp itself. Abaddon rose from his kneeling posture. "Then what would you have us do?" "Open your eyes," Horus said. "The Imperium is a corpse that does not yet know it is dead. We will give it new life, one free from the Emperor's deception." Torgadon swallowed hard. "You mean rebellion?" Horus smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile, the kind that breaks the soul of those who see it. "No, my son, I mean truth." In the days that followed, Horus isolated himself within his private sanctum. He spoke little, ate less, but the aura that surrounded him grew, a presence felt through every corridor of the vengeful spirit. The ship's crew whispered that they could feel his will in their dreams, calling to them, testing them. He no longer prayed to the Emperor. Instead, he meditated before an object that none had seen before, a small shifting sphere of glass and shadow, pulsing faintly like a living heart. It was said that Erebus had brought it to him, a gift from the priests of Davin. From that orb came whispers, faint, seductive, endless, and Horus listened. They did not tell him what to do. They merely reminded him of what he already believed. "You were made for this. You carry the fire of gods in mortal flesh. You will remake the galaxy in the image of your will." Weeks later, when the fleet mustered for a new campaign, the Warmaster summoned his captains to the Strategium. The room was lit in crimson, the light of the warp reflecting from polished armor and sharp eyes. A hololithic projection of the Segmentum Pacificus glowed before them, lines of conquest, worlds under imperial rule, and the paths of loyal legions still fighting in the Emperor's name. "Brothers," Horus began, "the Great Crusade was meant to bring unity. But what is unity under a lie? What is peace built upon chains?" He gestured to the glowing map. "These worlds kneel because they are forced to. Their faith has been stripped away, their spirits broken. The Emperor claims enlightenment, but he gives only silence." Aximand frowned. "And what would we give them instead, Lord?" "Choice," Horus said. "Faith. Purpose. The chance to become more than cogs in his machine." Abaddon's gauntlet tightened upon his weapon. "And the other Primarchs? Will they follow you?" "Some will," Horus said. "Others will cling to the illusion of loyalty. They will learn, in time, what I have seen." His gaze darkened. "And those who refuse will be left behind." When the meeting ended, the captains filed out in silence. Loken lingered longest. "You have changed, my lord," he said finally. "Your words, they frighten me." Horus turned, his expression unreadable. "Then you have understood them." Loken bowed his head, his voice barely a whisper. "And if I cannot follow?" "Then you will watch," Horus said softly. "And when the truth comes for you, you will remember that I tried to show you." That night, As the vengeful spirit drifted through the void, the Warmaster stood alone in his private chamber. The orb before him pulsed like a living eye. He reached out, placing a hand upon its surface. Visions flooded him, stars consumed in flame, brothers at war, the Emperor's throne cracked and empty. And beneath it all, a voice like silk. "You are ours, son of the storm." "No," Horus whispered. "I am my own." But deep within his soul, the boundary between those two truths was already gone. When dawn came, if dawn could be said to exist in the void, the fleet moved once more. Orders were given. The Emperor's will was no longer invoked. The Warmaster had awakened, and though his heart still believed he fought for mankind's freedom, the gods of the warp smiled in the shadows. For they knew what he did not, that the line between savior and destroyer had already vanished, and that Horus Lupercal, reborn upon Davin, was now the greatest weapon chaos had ever forged. The rebirth of Horus Lupercal did not thunder across the stars. It spread quietly, like oil upon still water. One ship whispered to another, one captain confided in his counterpart, and in the silence between transmissions, loyalty began to erode. The Warmaster no longer carried only the Emperor's authority, he carried a conviction that eclipsed it. And conviction, in the grim darkness of the far future, is the most dangerous weapon of all. In the great strategium of the vengeful spirit, the air shimmered with the holographic glow of 1,000 battlefronts. Worlds burned in miniature, fleets maneuvered in elegant spirals of light. The galaxy was at war, but none in that room saw conquest anymore. They saw opportunity. Erebus stood at Horus's side, silent as ever, the shadow behind the throne. Around them gathered the Warmaster's most trusted brothers, Fulgrim of the Emperor's children, Angron of the World Eaters, and Mortarion of the Death Guard. Each had been called from distant campaigns under the pretense of strategy. When the doors sealed, the light of the Emperor's sigil dimmed, replaced by the crimson hue of Horus's own standard, the eye of the Warmaster. "My brothers," Horus began, his voice low, magnetic, "I thank you for answering my summons. What I will speak now cannot leave this chamber." His words rolled like distant thunder. Fulgrim's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. Mortarion crossed his arms, silent, skeptical. Angron merely growled. "The Emperor has abandoned us," Horus said. "He hides on Terra, not to guide humanity, but to enslave it beneath his new order. I have seen his vision, a galaxy of obedience, ruled by his hand alone." Angron slammed a massive fist onto the table, the sound like a gunshot. "Good. Let him come out and face me, then. I'd see if his blood still runs red." "No," Horus replied, unshaken. "You would strike at the body. I strike at the heart." He turned to the others. "He made us to be his weapons, his sons, but we are not men's tools, nor angels of his false light. We are lords of war. The galaxy should kneel to us, not to a coward bound to a throne." Fulgrim's laughter rang like silver bells. "Ah, dear brother, I have long thought the same. A world without beauty, without ambition, what meaning does it hold? The Emperor would have us be perfect, yet deny us the freedom to define perfection ourselves." Mortarion's voice cut through the air like a blade of rust. "And what would you have us do, Horus? Burn Terra? Slay our brothers? You speak of freedom, but I smell deceit in every word." Horus met his gaze steady, unblinking. "No deceit, only revelation. We need not destroy the Imperium. We need only take it." Erebus stepped forward, his eyes gleaming in the crimson light. "The Warmaster speaks truth. The gods of the warp have shown him what awaits should we fail. The Emperor's ascension will cast all creation into servitude." At that, even Fulgrim faltered. "Gods," he repeated softly, his smile thinning. "You speak as if they are real." "They are," Horus said simply, "and they have no need of worship, only understanding. They offer power untainted by lies, power to shape destiny itself." Angron grinned, his fanged teeth glinting. "Power, eh? That's all I need to hear." Mortarion looked away, disgust twisting his scarred features. "You play with fire, Horus. Powers that promise freedom always demand a price." "Then let me be the one to pay it," Horus said. "I will bear the burden alone if I must." but I will not let him chain our kind to an eternity of servitude." The room fell silent. In that silence, something shifted, an invisible current of allegiance. Fulgrim stepped closer, his ornate armor catching the red glow. "Then tell us, brother, what is your plan?" Horus gestured to the holomap. The projection shifted, revealing the Istvan system, a cluster of worlds long pacified, now marked with red sigils. "We begin here," he said. "A campaign to test loyalty, to separate those who still cling to terror from those who see the truth. Istvan III will burn, but from its ashes we will forge a new Imperium, one that belongs to us." Mortarian's jaw tightened. "And if the Emperor learns of this? Then he will finally see that the age of his dominion is over." The meeting ended in uneasy alliance. Each Primarch departed with his own thoughts, some inflamed by ambition, others gnawed by doubt. But the seed had been sown. And seeds, once planted in the soil of pride, grow in silence until it is too late to uproot them. When they were alone again, Erebus turned to Horus. "They will follow you, my lord. Even those who doubt will not resist when they see the strength you command." "They will follow because they must," Horus said quietly. "The galaxy demands it. The Emperor built an empire of faith. I will build one of truth." Erebus inclined his head. "And the gods?" Horus's eyes glinted, unreadable. "They will have what they want, so long as it aligns with what I desire." "You believe you can command them?" Erebus asked carefully. "No," Horus said, "but I can use them, as the Emperor used us." That night, Horus stood before the great viewing pane of his ship, watching the warp shimmer like a living storm beyond the glass. The whispers came again, not as words this time, but as sensations, warmth, approval, a faint hum that resonated within his bones. He closed his eyes. For the first time since Davin, he felt peace. "Father," he murmured, "you made me your weapon, now I shall become your reckoning." The stars beyond the glass seemed to flicker in answer. And deep within the immaterium, something vast and patient stirred, a storm older than creation, now awakened by the pride of one man who once loved his father too much. When dawn came, orders were issued, fleets mobilized. And across the void, a message was transmitted, encrypted, silent, undeniable. "The Warmaster calls." From the distant reaches of the galaxy, the legions began to turn their gaze toward him. The first conspiracy of the Horus heresy had begun, not with rebellion, not with fury, but with belief. And belief, in the Imperium of man, has always been the deadliest heresy of all. At first glance, nothing seemed to have changed. The fleets of the Imperium still advanced, the banners of the Aquila still fluttered proudly over conquered worlds. Vox broadcasts still proclaimed victory in the name of the Emperor of mankind. But beneath the hymns and triumphal parades, something malignant stirred. The Great Crusade continued, but its purpose had been poisoned. The vengeful spirit no longer sailed as the Emperor's spearhead. It was now the vessel of a new faith, a crusade disguised in the language of obedience, its true aim hidden even from many of those who served aboard it. Horus Lupercal had learned from his father's perfection. The Emperor had built an empire of words, faith dressed as logic, divinity hidden in the guise of truth. Horus would do the same. Where the Emperor's word was law, the Warmaster's word became belief. He began his deception not with open rebellion, but with whispers, promises, and half-truths that dripped like honey into willing ears. "We fight still for the Imperium," he told his captains, "but not the hollow dream that has withered upon terror. We fight for what it was meant to be, an Imperium of men, not of gods." And in the silence that followed, his words took root. For years, the Space Marines had fought in the name of a master who had abandoned them to shadows. Many had begun to question the imperial truth, the absence of the Emperor's guidance, the endless wars fought for worlds that no longer remembered why they resisted. Horus gave their disillusionment a name and a purpose. The campaign of Rayna's Reach was his first test. It was a backwater system, its human population long estranged from the Imperium. They had built their own faith, worshipping ancient spirits that they claimed dwelt among the stars. Under normal circumstance, the compliance would have been simple: burn their idols, crush their resistance, impose the imperial creed. But Horus ordered otherwise. "We come not as conquerors," he declared to the planetary governor. "We come as brothers." His armies advanced, not with extermination, but with ceremony. Shrines were spared, banners untouched. Instead of obliteration, Horus offered recognition. The priests of Rhaenus bowed before him, calling him the voice between gods. When imperial observers later questioned the unorthodox campaign, Horus's answer was calm and reasonable. "Faith cannot be destroyed," he said. "It can only be guided. The Emperor's dream will not die in blood, but in understanding." The observers reported back to Terra, unaware that they had witnessed the First World willingly surrendered to heresy. Soon, other legions began to notice the shift. Fulgrim and his Emperor's children grew drunk on the beauty of Horus's philosophy: freedom as perfection, chaos as art. Angron's World Eaters embraced the new war as liberation from restraint. Mortarion's Death Guard, though slower to trust, found solace in Horus's promise of an Imperium unshackled by hypocrisy. To the wider Imperium, it still appeared as unity brothers fighting under one banner. But to those who could feel the undercurrent, the air had changed. There was zeal where there had been duty, hunger where there had been discipline. The Great Crusade had become a crusade against itself. Loken noticed it first. He walked the corridors of the Vengeful Spirit and found altars carved into the walls, small, secret things made by mortal hands. The icons were crude but powerful: eyes of gold, coiling serpents, sigils that pulsed faintly when touched. When he asked a serf where they came from, the man bowed low and whispered, "We honor the spirits who walk with the Warmaster." Loken smashed the idol to dust, but more appeared each day. He tried to confront Horus about it. "My lord, these symbols they spread across the decks, the men are turning from the Emperor." Horus looked up from the hololith, calm, patient. "No, Loken, they are turning to something greater. The Emperor is distant. I am here. I fight beside them, bleed with them. Would you have me punish their faith in what they can see?" "They worship you, Lord," Loken said, his voice breaking. "And that is not faith, that is blasphemy." "Blasphemy is a word for slaves," Horus replied quietly. "We are beyond such chains." Each new victory strengthened his control. Each compliance became a test. Worlds that resisted were crushed with the fury of gods. Worlds that submitted were rewarded with autonomy and praise. He replaced imperial oaths with vows of brotherhood. He replaced hymns to the Emperor with songs of the Warmaster's crusade. To the unknowing, it was loyalty rebranded. To those who saw clearly, it was rebellion baptized in light. And through it all, Horus spoke the same refrain: "The Emperor made us to save mankind. Now mankind must be saved from him." There was one moment, however, when the mask nearly slipped. During the campaign on Nerthus Prime, a loyalist detachment arrived unexpectedly, emissaries from Rogel Dawn's imperial fists, sent to review the Warmaster's methods. They found evidence of the new creed and confronted Horus directly. The meeting was brief. The emissaries were never seen again. When questioned, Horus's response was chillingly simple. They saw too little to understand and too much to live. From that day forward, his subordinates learned the unspoken law of the Vengeful Spirit. To question the Warmaster was to invite disappearance. And yet, through all his cold precision, Horus still believed himself righteous. He told himself that the Emperor's lies justified any deception, that every secret, every slaughter, every whispered corruption served a greater truth. Even as his dreams filled with the voices of the warp praising him, shaping him, promising him glory, he convinced himself he was in control. "They are tools," he told himself, "nothing more. I will use them, as I was once used." But the voices no longer whispered. They sang. They sang of war, of blood, of destiny written in flame. And as Horus listened, he mistook their hymns for his own thoughts. By the time the fleets turned toward the Istvan system, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a crusade of unity had become the prelude to damnation. The banners still bore the Emperor's sigil. The warriors still cried for the Imperium. But in the hearts of millions, the meaning of those words had changed forever. They no longer fought for the Emperor. They fought against the lie of him. The false crusade was over. The true war, the war that would tear the stars apart, had begun. And as the Warmaster stood upon the command deck, watching the fleets move into formation, he whispered to himself, "Father, you gave me the galaxy. Now watch as I make it my own." The Istvan system had always been a quiet place, a forgotten cluster of worlds whose histories were written in ash. It was here that the Warmaster chose to reveal his truth, not in words, but in fire. For months, Horus had moved his fleets under the guise of imperial compliance, cleansing the last pockets of rebellion in the sector. Loyalist commanders across the Imperium believed it a minor campaign, another triumph to add to the Warmaster's endless ledger of victories. But Horus knew better. This would not be a battle for conquest. It would be a battle for faith. The fleet entered orbit above Istvan III, a once proud world now consumed by civil strife. Loyalist and traitor forces alike still claimed allegiance to the Emperor, each accusing the other of heresy. Horus watched the chaos unfold with a stillness that unnerved even his captains. Abaddon approached, saluting sharply. "The planet's defense grid is crippled, my lord. Loyalist resistance remains strong, but victory is inevitable." Horus nodded slowly. "Good. Then let the false and the faithful show themselves." He turned toward the assembled officers, his eyes unreadable. "Dispatch all detachments deemed loyal to Terra. Let them cleanse the planet in the Emperor's name." No one questioned the order. Not yet. Thousands of Astartes, lunar wolves, Emperor's children, Death Guard, and World Eaters descended to the surface, each believing they carried out the Warmaster's will. Among them were the most faithful sons, Loken, Tarvitz, Garrow, and hundreds more who had never wavered in their devotion to the Emperor. They fought with courage unmatched, their loyalty burning bright even as Horus watched from orbit, silent and expressionless. On the second day of the campaign, as Istvan's skies turned crimson with smoke and fire, Horus summoned his command council. The hololithic projection of the planet flickered before them, glowing with thousands of life signatures locked in combat. Erebus stood beside him, arms folded, his lips curved in a knowing smile. "They fight well," he murmured. "The faithful always do." Abaddon's voice was low. "You intend to end it, don't you?" Horus did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered upon the glowing icons of his loyal sons. Then, without looking away, he spoke. "They have proven themselves. Now they will prove their devotion one final time." He turned to his officers. "Prepare the virus bombs." There was a moment of stillness, a pause where even the air seemed to recoil. Aximan's face went pale. "My lord, our own men are down there." "Yes," Horus replied, "and their sacrifice will cleanse this legion of weakness." He pressed his palm against the control console. The holomap shimmered. "Execute Operation Firestorm." Within minutes, the bombardment began. From the skies above Istvan, the fleet unleashed its plague. Dozens of cyclonic torpedoes screamed through the atmosphere, their warheads cracking open to release death in its purest form. The virus spread faster than fire, faster than breath. Cities turned to necropolises in seconds. The living became shriveled husks, their flesh liquefying into blackened sludge. The screams lasted less than a minute before silence swallowed them. Then came the fire. Orbital bombardments ignited the planet's surface, consuming everything that still clung to life. The very air burned. On the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Horus watched the inferno unfold. The reflection of the dying world flickered in his eyes, and though his expression never changed, something deep within him fractured. "They die as they lived," he said softly, "serving the Emperor's will." Erebus bowed his head in false reverence. "A fitting end, my lord. The first offering to your new destiny." But Abaddon could not meet his Warmaster's gaze. "And what of those who survive?" Horus's eyes darkened. "None will." Yet, on Istvan's scorched surface, survival refused to die. In the ruins of the once glorious city of Coral, a handful of loyalists endured, protected by bunkers and blind luck, Loken among them. He rose from the ashes, his armor scorched, his lungs filled with poison, and he understood, at last, what had been done. "He betrayed us," Loken rasped. "The Warmaster betrayed us all." They gathered what weapons they could, rallying beneath the shattered ruins of the Imperial Palace. Their vox channels screamed with chaos, desperate messages from brothers who could not comprehend the truth. "Hold your ground," Loken shouted. "If this is our death, then let it mean something." Above, the fleet descended again, but this time, The drop pods that fell from the heavens did not carry allies, they carried executioners. The second wave came in silence. Death Guard, World Eaters, and Emperor's children, their banners torn clean of the Aquila. They landed amid the ashes, their bolters aimed not at Xenos, but at brothers. What followed was slaughter without equal. Loyalist Astartes fought with desperation, their every breath a denial of the betrayal that had consumed their father's name. The air filled with the clash of chain blades and the thunder of bolter fire. The ground itself became a charnel pit. Loken faced Aximand, his brother, his friend, across a field of corpses. "Why?" he demanded, his voice breaking through the vox. "Why would you do this?" Aximand's reply was almost a whisper. "Because he told us the truth." And then they fought, not as soldiers, but as souls tearing each other apart. When the last stronghold fell, Horus gave the order to withdraw. The fires of Istvan III burned for weeks, turning oceans to steam and mountains to slag. To the Imperium, the reports spoke of rebellion crushed and victory achieved. To those who knew, it was the moment the galaxy itself was damned. In his private chamber, Horus removed his gauntlets and stared at his hands, the same hands that had once lifted worlds from darkness, now soaked in the blood of his brothers. Erebus entered quietly. "It is done. The weak are gone. What remains will build your new Imperium." Horus did not answer. He simply stared into the fire. For a moment, just one, the mask slipped. He saw again the faces of the men he had killed, heard their laughter, remembered the warmth of their faith. "I loved them," he said softly. Erebus bowed his head. So did he. Horus closed his eyes. The firelight flickered across his scarred face, casting it in the image of something divine and monstrous all at once. "Then perhaps," he whispered, "I am becoming him." The betrayal of Istvan III was complete, and with it, the Warmaster crossed the threshold from doubt to conviction. The galaxy would never know loyalty again. When the skies of Istvan III burned, it was not war, it was judgment. The virus bombs fell like tears from heaven, their descent silent, their purpose absolute. To those below, they looked almost beautiful, shimmering streaks of emerald light cutting through the clouds. To the men who had deployed them, they were the beginning of a new age, the cleansing fire that would purge loyalty itself. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Horus Lupercal watched in silence as the first detonations bloomed across the planet's surface. The view from orbit resembled flowers, opening blossoms of decay, unfurling in terrible slow motion. Each explosion released a contagion designed by the Mechanicum's darkest adepts, a weapon that devoured all organic matter in seconds. Cities crumbled, oceans turned black. Men became liquid shadows before they could scream. The world died as beautifully as it had lived. Abaddon stood at his Warmaster's side, his face unreadable behind his helm. "It is done," he said. "The virus has spread to every continent." Horus did not respond. His gaze remained fixed upon the hololithic projection of Istvan, a world dissolving into nothingness. Behind them, Erebus smiled faintly, his voice low and reverent. "The Emperor claimed to be the god of mankind. Yet in this moment, it is you, my lord, who holds the power of gods." Horus turned, his eyes cold. "Do not mistake necessity for divinity." Erebus inclined his head. "Even necessity is worshipped. In time." Hours later, the second phase began. Flame bombardments rained upon the dead world, igniting the virus clouds in a cataclysmic chain reaction. The atmosphere itself caught fire, wrapping Istvan III in a cocoon of white flame. The shockwave reached the orbiting fleets, not as a physical force, but as a sound, a groan that rippled through the void, like the dying breath of a god. Horus closed his eyes. For the briefest instant, he thought he could hear them, the voices of his sons echoing through the burning air. "Why, father? Why?" He dismissed it as imagination, yet the sound lingered, faint and accusing, as though the dying planet itself refused to forgive him. On the surface, death had been nearly absolute. Nearly. Beneath the ruins of Coral City, bunkers and fortresses built during the early crusade had held. There, a few thousand Astartes still lived, lunar wolves, Emperor's children, Death Guard, and World Eaters warriors too stubborn or too fortunate to die when their father commanded it. They emerged into a world drowned in poison and silence. The sky was a smear of green fire. The ground was slick with the melted remains of men and cities. And amid that horror, they realized the truth. The bombardment had not been aimed at the enemy. It had been aimed at them. Gaviel Loken stood among the survivors, his armor blackened, his voice hoarse. "He's betrayed us," he said. "The Warmaster, our father, did this." Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children nodded grimly. "And he will send more. The orbitals will descend again, to finish what the virus could not." Around them, hundreds of battle brothers knelt, stunned into silence. Some wept openly, their faith collapsing under the weight of revelation. But others, veterans hardened by centuries of war, rose with grim resolve. "Then we die as sons of the Emperor," Loken said, "not as victims of treachery." They gathered weapons from the dead, fortified what ruins they could, and waited for the inevitable. Above them, in the cold dark of orbit, the traitor fleets rearmed. Within the vengeful spirit, Horus convened his inner circle once more. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and incense, a mockery of sanctity. Fulgrim leaned lazily against a pillar, his armor immaculate despite the slaughter below. "You have cleansed your legion of doubt," he said. "But at what cost? The blood of those who loved you most stains your hands." Horus's expression did not change. "They chose their faith. I chose the truth." Angron laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Faith, truth, words for weak men. You killed them because they were fools. That's all." Mortarion said nothing. His pale eyes watched Horus with quiet loathing and something else, envy. "You think this makes you strong," Mortarion said finally, "but you've only bound yourself tighter to the thing that killed them." "The Emperor?" Horus asked. "No," Mortarion said softly. "Your pride." The room fell silent. Even Erebus, usually so quick to speak, lowered his gaze. Horus turned back toward the window, his voice calm but filled with something dark. "The weak are dead, the strong remain, and strength will be what builds the new Imperium." On the planet below, the survivors fought on. When the second bombardment began, they fled into the caverns, a futile but defiant gesture. The Death Guard's Garrow led evacuation shuttles through storms of fire, saving as many as he could. Tarvitz, Loken, and a handful of others held the line against impossible odds, their bolters singing hymns of rage and sorrow. They knew they would not live, but they also knew that what they had seen could not be buried forever. "If even one of us escapes," Tarvitz said, "the truth will follow him, and the galaxy will remember what was done here." He was right. When the last signals from Istvan faded, Horus gave the order to move on. "Erase all records of this campaign," he said. "There was no rebellion here. There was only compliance." The Mechanicum recorded his words without hesitation. History bent to his will. But the warp does not forget. As the fleets left the burning system, the screams of the dead still echoed faintly through the immaterium, not as words, but as emotion, betrayal, grief, and rage. Erebus listened and smiled. "They will curse your name for 10,000 years, he said softly. Horus's reply was calm, almost tender. "Then let them curse me, so long as they remember me." He turned from the viewport, the dying planet reflected in the gold of his armor. "The Emperor builds an empire of silence," he said. "I will build one of memory." And so, amid fire and disease, the Warmaster forged his legend. The virus bombs had done more than kill men, they had killed faith. And in the void that followed, only one truth remained. The galaxy belonged to Horus, and it would burn in his name. The surface of Istvan III was no longer a world, it was a graveyard of dust and bone. The virus bombs had done their work with monstrous precision. Whole continents scoured, oceans boiled, cities reduced to shimmering lakes of glass. But in the cracks of that dead planet, life still clung stubbornly to the ashes. 1,000 warriors, perhaps fewer, still fought on. They were the last true sons of the Emperor, betrayed by the father they had once loved without question. And they would not die quietly. Gaviel Loken led them through the shattered ruins of Coral City. His armor was scorched black, his voice rough from the poisoned air, but his resolve had never been sharper. "The traitors think us dead," he told his brothers. "Then let us haunt them from the shadows." Beside him, Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children nodded grimly. They'll come again, they have to. Horus cannot allow survivors. Then we make our deaths costly, Loken said. Every life we take is a wound upon his soul. In the ruins around them, the survivors fortified what little remained, a bunker, a shattered cathedral, a collapsed transit hub. They scavenged bolters, ammunition, ration packs. Their armor was cracked, their hearts broken, yet something unshakable bound them together. They were no longer legions. They were brothers in damnation. The traitor fleets descended again within the day. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, raining from the burning sky like comets. When they struck, the world shook. Out of those pods came the monsters Horus had made from his once loyal sons, Death Guard breathing pestilence, world eaters howling with bloodlust, emperor's children adorned in gold and violet, like angels of rot. The ground trembled under the weight of betrayal reborn. Tarvitz's vox crackled. Positions. Hold your lines. Remember who you are. The reply came from every direction, ragged, desperate, defiant. For the Emperor. For the Imperium. For the truth. And then the killing began anew. The first waves hit like an avalanche. Chain blades roared, bolters thundered, plasma burned through armor and bone alike. The traitors advanced without mercy, slaughtering their former brothers with the joy of madness. Yet the loyalists did not break. Loken fought with the fury of grief itself, his power sword blazing through the corrupted ranks of the lunar wolves, who once called him brother. Every face he cut down was familiar, every kill another scar carved into his soul. He met Aximand again upon a ridge of melted glass. It didn't have to be this way, Loken shouted, their blades locking in sparks. Aximand's voice came through the vox flat, almost sorrowful. No, Garviel. It always did. They fought like the past itself, tearing at its own flesh, until the ridge beneath them collapsed and hurled them both into the fires below. In the ruins of the cathedral, Tarvitz led the last of his emperor's children against Fulgrim's corrupted elite. The air was filled with music beautiful and obscene. The traitor marines fought to a rhythm only they could hear, their movements graceful, inhuman. Tarvitz cut one down, then another, shouting above the cacophony, "You were artists once, not butchers." A voice answered through the haze, high, melodic, and cold. "Art demands sacrifice, brother. Today, we paint with truth." And with that, the cathedral collapsed in on itself, burying loyalists and traitors alike beneath its gilded bones. Elsewhere, the Death Guard advanced through the ruins, their armor steaming with disease. Garrow, once captain of the 7th Company, stood among the survivors, his faith unbroken. "You can kill our bodies," he shouted across the battlefield, "but you cannot kill the Emperor's truth." The Death Guard commander opposite him laughed, his voice gurgling through a rotted vox. "Truth dies when men do. Then it will live forever," Garrow replied and detonated the charges he had buried beneath their feet. The explosion lit the sky like dawn. High above, in orbit, Horus watched. The hololithic display flickered with life signs fading, one by one. His bridge was silent, save for the hum of engines and the distant thunder of orbital fire. Abaddon stood at his side, impassive. "They fight well," he said. "They always did," Horus murmured. "That is why they had to die." He did not look away as the last bastions went dark, yet his hands trembled just once. Erebus saw it. "Their deaths are not a burden, my lord. They are your ascension." Horus's eyes hardened. "Ascension means nothing if it demands their blood." "Then why do you hesitate?" Erebus whispered. "You cannot be reborn and cling to what you were." The words lingered. The Warmaster said nothing more. On the surface, night fell at last. The surviving loyalists gathered in the ruins of what had once been the governor's palace. The fires had died, the air was still, they knew the end had come. Tarvitz stood at the edge of the crumbling balcony, his armor cracked, his sword broken. He looked to Loken, who limped forward from the shadows, his face half hidden beneath a shattered helm. "You lived," Tarvitz said, almost in disbelief. "For now," Loken answered, "not for long." They looked out at the burning horizon, the endless plain of ruins stretching to the stars. "We'll die here," Tarvitz said. "Yes," Loken replied, "but not forgotten." He raised his bolter one last time. "Let them come." And they did. The final assault came at dawn. The sky tore open with thunder as the traitor legions advanced, their banners black against the burning clouds. There were no speeches, no war cries, no mercy. Only the sound of bolters. When it was over, Istvan III was silent again. Garviel Loken would crawl from those ashes days later, half dead, his mind broken and his heart hollow. Tarvitz and the others were gone, burned into legend. He alone would carry the memory of what had been done there. And through him, the truth would survive long enough to damn the Warmaster forever. On the vengeful spirit, Horus sat alone in his chamber, the echoes of battle still ringing faintly through the ship's hull. He could not sleep. He saw their faces in every shadow, Loken, Tarvitz, Garrow, all those who had once called him father. He whispered to himself, as if to a ghost, "Forgive me. I did what I must." But no forgiveness came, only silence. And in that silence, the gods who had whispered to him before began to laugh. The screams of Istvan III faded into the void, but their echo did not die. It spread, carried on the warp currents, whispered through the dreams of men and monsters alike. The galaxy had felt the first tremor of its own undoing, and even the stars seemed to dim. The Emperor's greatest son had turned, and soon, half of creation would follow. News of Horus's victory reached Terra cloaked in lies. The official reports spoke of glorious compliance, of rebellion crushed, of the Warmaster's flawless execution of the Emperor's will. In the marble halls of the Imperial Palace, scribes and remembrancers celebrated another conquest won for mankind. Only the Emperor himself, locked within his secret project, remained silent, but whispers found their way to the wrong ears. Ships that escaped the carnage of Istvan carried the truth. Men like Garrow, broken and half-mad, told stories of brother killing brother, of virus bombs and treachery. And though few believed them, the seeds of doubt were sown. Meanwhile, the Warmaster's fleets expanded their reach. Horus moved swiftly, with the precision of a god and the cunning of a serpent. He struck not at the Emperor's throne, but at his foundations, communication hubs, supply worlds, forge planets, and relay stations. Each world that fell was rewritten. Each world that resisted burned. On Coronet Prime, the local governor swore loyalty to the Emperor. Horus's response was swift. "Then serve him," he said, "in death." The bombardment that followed turned the planet into glass. Its image, a glowing corpse of a world, was broadcast to every system within range. A message written in annihilation: serve Horus, or share Coronet's fate. The first legions to join him did so willingly. Fulgrim's Emperor's children knelt before him in admiration, their obsession with perfection now warped into worship of excess. Angron's World Eaters followed out of bloodlust and fury. They had never needed much persuasion. Mortarian's Death Guard, ever distrustful of gods and men alike, joined in grim resignation. Others hesitated until Horus visited them in person. He spoke not as a conqueror, but as a brother. He reminded them of the wars they had fought, the worlds they had saved, the blood they had spilled while the Emperor sat silent on Terra. He spoke of freedom, destiny, and betrayal. And one by one the Primarchs bowed. In the halls of the Word-bearers, Lorgar welcomed him like a prophet returns to his temple. "I told them, brother," Lorgar said, kneeling. "I told them faith would be our salvation. You are proof of it." Horus smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Faith is a blade, Lorgar. The wise use it, the foolish worship it." The two embraced, each believing the other the instrument of their god's will. From that moment on, their alliance became the beating heart of heresy, faith, and pride, joined in perfect damnation. Not all accepted him so easily. When Horus's envoys reached Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, the stone-faced Primarch replied with only 4 words: "I serve the Emperor." The message returned to Horus unanswered, and when it reached Terra, it was already too late. The rebellion spread like wildfire, devouring all it touched. The legions divided. Suns turned upon suns. Fleet fought fleet in the darkness between stars. Even Mars, the beating heart of the Mechanicum, fractured. Half the forges pledged themselves to the Warmaster, seduced by his promise of unrestricted experimentation, the freedom to merge flesh and machine without restraint. The rest remained loyal to Terra, sparking a civil war that would scar the Red Planet for centuries. Factories that once built the Emperor's war machines now forged weapons for his enemies. The great engines of the Omnissiah roared not in prayer, but in rebellion. In the deep reaches of space, the Battle of Paramar, the Schism of Mars, the Purge of Aulis, each was a prelude, each a spark in a firestorm that grew beyond control. Horus no longer needed to command the war. The war had taken on a will of its own. He stood upon the command dais of the vengeful spirit, watching hololithic projections of entire sectors burning. The faces of his brothers appeared in the void, Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, Lorgar, all pledging their victories in his name. "They come to me," Horus murmured. "Not to the Emperor. Not anymore." Erebus bowed. "They see the truth, Lord. You are the light now." "No," Horus said. "I am the fire, and fire consumes all." In the Imperial Palace, Rogel Dawn gathered the loyal sons Guilliman, Vulcan, Corvus Corax, Ferrus Manus, and revealed the truth. The council chamber shook with fury. "This cannot be," Guilliman said. "Not Horus. He was the finest of us." "He is the finest of us," Dawn replied grimly. "That is why we will bleed to stop him." Ferrus Manus clenched his iron fists. "Then we meet him at Istvan. He will not take another world." And so they gathered their fleets, unaware that Horus already awaited them and that their loyalty would soon be tested by the most terrible deception yet. On the vengeful spirit, Horus stood before the eye of the Warmaster, the banner now adorned with runes that shimmered faintly in warp light. He traced a finger across the fabric, watching it ripple like living flesh. "The Emperor built an imperium of lies," he whispered. "I will give them a truth they cannot ignore." Behind him, Erebus and Lorgar exchanged knowing glances. "Then it begins," Lorgar said softly. "The age of the gods." "No," Horus replied. "The age of men." But the shadows at his back laughed quietly, for they knew what he could not admit, that both ages were already one and the same. As the fleets gathered again above Istvan, history bent toward its inevitable breaking point. The fires that began as whispers had become suns bright enough to blind even gods. The heresy had become more than rebellion. It was creation. It was destruction. It was the birth scream of a galaxy devouring itself. And in the heart of that scream, the Warmaster smiled. "It begins anew," he said, "and this time, Father, I will finish what you could not." By the time the first traitor fleets broke through the outer systems, Terra was no longer a world, it was a fortress built from desperation and prayer. The cradle of mankind had become a tomb of iron and stone, its surface buried beneath bastions, void shields, and gun batteries that could scorch continents. The sky above it was no longer blue nor black, but a constant storm of ships and smoke. The Warmaster was coming home. The Imperium had known wars without number, but never one like this. The enemy was not Xenos, nor alien horror. The enemy was itself. The loyal legions, those that had survived Horus's purge, rallied under Rogel Dawn's command. His imperial fists manned the palace walls. Guilliman's Ultramarines and Corax's Raven Guard fought to reinforce the surrounding systems. Vulcan's salamanders ferried civilians through warp storms that bled like open wounds. But every message they sent into the void was drowned out by static, or worse, by whispers. The warp had become a sea of madness, its currents twisted by the very gods that now guided Horus's hand. The Emperor remained upon Terra, silent, his will channeled through the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon. Some said he was preparing a weapon that would end the war. Others whispered he was simply waiting to die. When the first shadow fell over Terra, it came not from the sun, but from the vengeful spirit. The Warmaster's flagship emerged from the warp like a wound tearing open the sky. Behind it came the rest, a fleet so vast it blotted out the stars. Billions died in the first hour, their bodies vaporized as orbital fire rained down upon the system's defenses. Planetary shields held, but barely. The heavens themselves seemed to burn. In the command bastion of the Imperial Palace, Rogel Dawn stood before a massive hololithic map, his armor cracked, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "He's here," said Malkador the Sigillite, his voice low. "Then this is where we stand," Dawn replied. "Terra will not fall while I still draw breath." "And if it does?" Malkador asked. Dawn's gaze hardened. "Then I will hold its ashes in my hands." Above them, Horus watched the blue and gold sphere of his birth world with quiet fury. To his eyes, Terra looked less like a home and more like a prison. Every fortress, every wall, every monument spoke of control of the Emperor's need to bind humanity to his image. "He made this world his throne," Horus said softly. "I will make it his grave." Abaddon stood beside him, his voice tight with anticipation. "The guns of Terra will tear us apart if we attack head-on." "Then we will not," Horus replied. "Let them believe we fear their walls. We will strike where their faith is weakest." He turned to his gathered lieutenants, Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, and Perturabo, the architects of his coming storm. "You each have your purpose. Fulgrim, break their morale. Angron, drown their bastions in blood. Mortarion, bring the air itself against them. And you, Perturabo, open me a path to the throne." The Iron Warrior bowed his head. "It will be done." And thus began the siege of Terra. The first week was a nightmare given form. The traitor fleets swarmed the void around the planet, choking it with debris and flame. Dropships fell by the tens of thousands, disgorging legions of heretics and daemons alike onto the soil of mankind's birth. The ground trembled as titans walked, god machines of both loyalist and traitor design, each firing weapons capable of cracking mountains. The air turned red from the blood of billions. At the front lines, the World Eaters tore through trenches like wolves through lambs. The Death Guard turned the very atmosphere into poison, their advance heralded by clouds of disease. The Emperor's children filled the air with their unholy music, killing by sound alone. And through it all, the defenders held. Imperial fists fought from wall to wall, their bolters burning with devotion. The custodians, golden and silent, cut through daemons with blades that shone like miniature suns. The Sisters of Silence moved among the defenders like ghosts, their presence stripping the warp of its power wherever they walked. But the tide was endless. Every victory bought with 1,000,000 lives was undone by the next wave. Every inch of ground soaked in blood was retaken and lost again before the next dawn. In his sanctum deep within the palace, the Emperor worked without rest. His body was motionless, but his mind reached across time itself, weaving something vast, incomprehensible, and terrible. Malcador watched, silent and afraid. "You cannot save both," he said at last. "The Imperium or your son. One must die for the other to live." The Emperor's voice filled the chamber, calm and infinite. "I know." On the vengeful spirit, Horus felt his presence in the warp, faint but still powerful, a beacon of golden light amid the storm. It burned him to look upon it. "He hides behind his walls, still pretending to be God," Horus whispered, "but I will show him what divinity truly costs." He turned to Abaddon. "Ready the spear tip. When Perturabo's breach is made, we strike for the throne. And if he waits for us there, then I will look into his eyes," Horus said, "and remind him who taught me to kill." Weeks passed. The walls of the palace trembled. Entire cities were ground to dust beneath the feet of warring titans. The sky itself screamed. And still, neither side yielded. For every daemon slain, 10 more clawed their way from the warp. For every fortress shattered, a new line was raised behind it. The Emperor's light dimmed, but it did not die. And in the shadows of that dying light, the Warmaster's heart began to harden into something colder than hatred purpose. He no longer fought to win. He fought to end. At last, the outer walls of the Imperial Palace cracked. Perturabo's siege cannons fired one final volley, and the grand gates of the Eternity Wall fell inward. From the broken horizon came the sound of 100,000 engines, the tramp of 10 million boots, the roar of endless war. The sons of the Emperor had come home. And this time, they came not to build but to bury. The siege had raged for months. The palace walls had cracked, its towers blackened by fire, its halls flooded with blood. The air itself had become poison. The warp bled openly into reality. Every sunrise was a lie. Every night was the end of the world. The Warmaster's dream of victory was almost complete. But for all his triumphs, for every fortress fallen, there remained one prize that eluded him, the golden throne itself, and the god who sat upon it. The Emperor. The father he had loved. The master he had betrayed. The god he swore to kill. On the plains before the Eternity Gate, the greatest armies of mankind clashed for the last time. Titans strode through the ruins like gods of iron, their weapons turning mountains to dust. The sky burned with the light of dying ships as the fleets above tore each other apart. At the center of it all, the vengeful spirit hung in low orbit, its massive form crackling with warp energy. It had become more than a ship now, it was a temple, a wound in reality, a throne of damnation. And from that throne, Horus watched his father's world die. "It is almost done," Erebus whispered beside him. "The Emperor hides in his shell. He cannot stop what he has already begun." Horus turned, and for the first time, the faintest smile touched his lips. Then let him watch his dream burn. On Terra, Rogel Dawn and Sanguinius fought back to back upon the steps of the Eternity Gate. Around them, the Imperial fists and blood angels bled into the soil, holding back wave after wave of daemons and traitors. Sanguinius's wings were torn, his armor shattered, his blade slick with the blood of both men and monsters. He turned to Dawn, his eyes bright with exhaustion and purpose. "He calls to me," Sanguinius said. "The Warmaster. The end of this war lies not here, but above." Dawn's expression darkened. "Then I will go with you." "No," the angel replied. "This is my duty." Before Dawn could answer, Sanguinius spread his broken wings and rose into the smoke-filled sky, a streak of gold ascending toward the cursed star that was the vengeful spirit. Dawn watched until he vanished, and then turned back to the gate. "Hold the line," he growled, "until there is nothing left to hold." The Emperor stood upon the golden throne, surrounded by the quiet hum of a dying empire. Malcador knelt beside him, his face pale, his voice little more than a whisper. "He comes, my lord." "I know," the Emperor said. "If you face him, you may not survive." "If I do not," the Emperor replied, "none of this will." He rose, and the light that surrounded him dimmed the world itself. He was not armored as a warrior, nor crowned as a god. He wore only the burden of his own creation. And when he spoke again, his voice filled the chambers like thunder. "Prepare the bridge, I will go to him." Sanguinius was the first to enter the Warmaster's sanctum. The vengeful spirit was no longer a ship of iron, but a living nightmare. Its corridors pulsed like veins, its bulkheads whispered blasphemies. The air stank of incense and blood. He found Horus in the Grand Strategium, standing before a massive viewport that showed the burning world below. The Warmaster turned slowly as his brother entered, his eyes calm, almost kind. "My beloved angel," Horus said, "you should not have come." "You left me no choice," Sanguinius answered, raising his sword. "This ends now." Horus's smile was mournful. "You still do not understand. I did this for us. For all of us. Father would make us slaves to his light. I would make us free." "Free?" Sanguinius spat. "You call this freedom? Look below you, Horus. You've built an empire of corpses." The Warmaster's voice softened. "I wanted peace, brother. I wanted a world where we could be gods, not tools. He would not allow it. And so you made yourself what he feared most." They stared at one another for a long moment, two sons of the same father, one crowned in ruin, the other in sorrow. Then they moved. Their blades clashed, and the ship itself screamed. Lightning arced through the air as angel fought warlord, light against shadow, faith against fury. Sanguinius struck first, his sword blazing with the Emperor's blessing, but Horus caught the blade in his talon, twisted, and sent the angel crashing through a wall of glass and metal. "You are strong," Horus said, his voice full of pride and grief. "But strength is not enough. Not anymore." Sanguinius rose again, blood on his lips, his wings torn. "Then I will show you what faith is." He struck again, faster, harder, driving Horus back, step by step. For a heartbeat, the angel's sword pierced the Warmaster's armor and drew blood. But that heartbeat was all he gained. With a roar, Horus struck him down. The blade shattered in Sanguinius's hands, and the Warmaster's claw tore through his chest. The angel gasped once, his golden eyes meeting Horus's. "I pity you, brother," he whispered. "Even victory will not save you." And then he was still. Horus lowered his body gently to the ground, his expression unreadable. "You were the best of us," he said softly, "and now you are free." The Emperor arrived moments later. When he entered the chamber, Horus was waiting, and at his feet lay the body of Sanguinius. Father and son faced each other for the first time since Davin. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of the dying ship and the crackle of warp fire outside the hull. Then Horus said quietly, "You should not have come. I have already won." The Emperor's eyes glowed like dawn breaking through the end of the world. "You have won nothing. Look at what you've made. Look at what you've become." "I became what you feared," Horus said. "I became you." The Emperor shook his head slowly. "No, my son. You became what I tried to save you from." Horus's face twisted pride, pain, love, and fury all at once. "Then save me now." And the two greatest beings of mankind, God and Son, Creator and Destroyer, raised their hands in silence. The final war began, not for an empire, but for the soul of humanity itself. The throne room of the vengeful spirit was no longer a place built by mortal hands. The warp had remade it into a cathedral of blasphemy. Pillars of bone and brass reached toward a ceiling of living flame, and beneath that fire walked gods disguised as men. Reality itself bent around them, trembling under the weight of their will. The Emperor stood wreathed in gold, his light steady but dimmed by sorrow. Horus faced him, a storm made flesh, his armor alive with symbols that pulsed like veins, his eyes burning with the combined fury of gods. Father and son, creator and heir, light and shadow, the first and last of mankind's hopes. And between them lay Sanguinius, broken, and still the angel who had loved them both. For a long moment, neither moved. The Emperor looked at his son and saw not the Warmaster, but the boy he had raised upon the battlefields of forgotten worlds, the boy who had laughed beneath alien suns, who had believed utterly in the dream of unity. "Horus," the Emperor said softly, "it is not too late. End this madness. Cast off what you've become." The Warmaster smiled faintly, not with mockery, but with something like pity. "I am what you made me. You taught me conquest, and I learned it too well." He spread his arms, and the fires of the warp swirled behind him, shaping themselves into faces, eyes, and shadows. "Look upon me, Father. Behold your triumph. I have given humanity gods, and they have given me their love." "Love born of fear is not love," the Emperor replied. "It is slavery." "Then what is yours?" Horus thundered. "You chained them to your truth, crushed their faith, demanded obedience, and called it salvation. I would give them freedom even if it means the stars must burn." The Emperor's voice did not rise, but his words struck like thunder. "You would trade one cage for another, gilded in your pride. You think yourself free, but you are nothing more than the vessel of the things that whisper to you." "No," Horus said, his tone breaking for the first time. "I am their equal, their chosen." "No, my son," the Emperor said again. "You are theirs." The Warmaster roared, and the universe tore open. The power of chaos poured through him, fire and shadow twisting into forms that no mortal could comprehend. The deck beneath them split apart as the warp flooded in, screaming with the voices of 1,000,000,000 damned souls. Horus struck first. Lightning leapt from his blade, searing through the Emperor's armor and hurling him backward through a column of molten brass. The impact shook the ship to its core. "You see, Father?" Horus bellowed. "Even your light can bleed." The Emperor rose slowly, golden light blazing from his wounds. He said nothing. He only raised his hand, and the light grew brighter. The air ignited. A beam of pure psychic power lanced outward, colliding with the Warmaster's shield in a storm that shattered the floor beneath them. The blast hurled them both into the void, two titans locked in a storm of creation and ruin. Outside, the crew of the vengeful spirit felt the world tremble. Daemons shrieked as the raw power of their masters clashed, burning them to ash. The ship screamed as if alive, its flesh tearing under the strain. Within, the duel became timeless. Horus struck like a god of war, faster, stronger, more terrible than ever before. Every blow carried the wrath of the Immaterium. His laughter echoed across the bridge, triumphant and broken all at once. The Emperor endured. His blade, forged from the light of humanity's soul, sang as it met Horus's claw. Each strike was a word, each parry a prayer, each wound a chapter in the tragedy of their making. "You cannot win," Horus said. "The gods have chosen me." Then they will die with you, the Emperor answered. At last, Horus broke through his guard. A blade of pure darkness sliced through the Emperor's side, burning flesh and spirit alike. The golden light faltered, flickered, and for a moment, the god of mankind was simply a man. Horus seized him by the throat, lifting him high. I could spare you, Horus whispered. Renounce this empire, kneel to me, and I will rebuild what you have broken. The Emperor's eyes met his son's. There was no hatred there, only unbearable love. I am proud of you, my son, he said quietly, even in this. For a heartbeat, Horus hesitated, and in that heartbeat, something within him wavered. The man he had once been flickered beneath the monster he had become. He saw Sanguinius's face, pale and still. He saw the brothers he had damned, the worlds he had burned, the dream he had betrayed. He saw himself as he truly was, a puppet dancing on invisible strings. He screamed. The gods howled in rage, clawing at his soul, forcing his hand. But the Emperor had seen. Forgive me, he whispered, not to himself, but to Horus. Then he unleashed everything. The light that erupted from the Emperor's hand was not of this universe. It was the raw truth of existence, the divine essence of humanity's soul made manifest. It tore through Horus's armor, through his flesh, through the very idea of him. The powers that sustained him shrieked and fled, burning in the brilliance of that impossible light. For one fleeting instant, Horus was himself again, the beloved son, the Warmaster of the Great Crusade. He looked upon his father and smiled. I was wrong, he said. I wanted to save them, and I only damned them. The Emperor caught him as he fell, cradling his dying form. You did what you thought was right, he said softly, and that is why I cannot hate you. The Warmaster's body began to dissolve into light and ash. Will they ever forgive me? In time, the Emperor said. In time, they will forget. And then Horus was gone. Silence returned to the vengeful spirit. The Emperor stood alone among the ruins of gods and dreams, the body of his son reduced to nothing but dust. The golden light that surrounded him flickered and dimmed, his strength spent, his wounds mortal. Malcador's voice echoed faintly through the aether, calling to him. It is done, my lord. But you are dying. I know. What remains of you must endure. Then let it endure, the Emperor said. He looked once more at the spot where Horus had stood, then turned toward the burning world below. Mankind must live. That is all that matters. And with the last of his strength, he vanished from the ship in a flare of golden fire. When the vengeful spirit fell silent, the galaxy did too. The Warmaster was dead. The Emperor was broken. And the Imperium, the dream they had built together, was left to drown in the twilight between gods and ghosts. The throne of gold still burns. Its light has never gone out, nor has its agony. 10,000 years have passed since father struck down son, since the vengeful spirit vanished into the warp, and terror drowned in its own smoke. Yet still the Emperor endures, neither living nor dead, chained eternally to the machine he built to save mankind. The galaxy remembers his triumph not as salvation, but as tragedy without end. And the name of Horus Lupercal, once the brightest star in that firmament, has become a curse. But legends have a strange mercy. They forget just enough to survive. When the battle ended, the surviving loyalists found the Emperor upon the golden throne. His armor was shattered, his body burned, his spirit scattered across realities beyond mortal comprehension. Malcador was gone, reduced to dust and light, his sacrifice, the final act that allowed the Emperor's essence to be bound within the psychic engines of the throne. The custodians carried their god to his seat of power, and as they sealed the throne room, the world outside wept. Rogel Dawn, his armor blackened and his heart hollow, looked upon what remained of his father and whispered, You said we would bring unity. All we have brought is silence. The silence has never left. The Imperium that rose from the ashes of the heresy was not the dream the Emperor had built, it was a corpse animated by fear and faith. Once, he had forbidden worship. Now, his servants called him God Emperor. Once, he had sought to free mankind from superstition. Now, every cathedral in the galaxy burned incense to his eternal soul. In their desperation, humanity replaced truth with ritual, reason with devotion, understanding with obedience. And perhaps it was necessary, for the galaxy that remained was no longer ruled by men but by nightmares. The warp bled openly. The traitor legions scattered into the Eye of Terror, each carving their own kingdom of madness, each a reflection of the god they served. Fulgrim became a serpent of beauty and vice. Angron, a beast of endless slaughter. Mortarion, a living plague. Lorgar, the prophet of damnation. And Abaddon, Horus's heir, carried the Warmaster's mantle into eternity, a herald of the wars that would never end. In those first centuries after the siege, the Imperium nearly collapsed. Civil wars tore through its heart, entire sectors rebelled, the Astronomicon flickered. Humanity came close to falling into the same abyss from which it had once emerged. But the Emperor's light dim, agonized, but unbroken held. The High Lords of Terror rose from the ashes, claiming to serve his will. They built a theocracy upon his name, wielding bureaucracy like a weapon. Each decree, each law, each new cathedral built was an attempt to justify the impossible truth. Their god was dead, and yet he lived. For the warriors who survived the heresy, there was no peace. The loyal legions were broken into smaller chapters, a measure of control to ensure that never again would one son wield such power. They took oaths upon oaths, binding themselves to an imperium that was now little more than a shadow of its former glory. Rogaldorn reforged his legion into the imperial fists, guardians of Terror's wounds. Guilliman returned to Ultramar to rebuild, only to vanish into legend centuries later. The Lion disappeared among the ruins of Caliban, his fate uncertain. Vulcan wandered, immortal and weary, searching for redemption. Each carried a part of the Emperor's grief with them, and all of them lived under the same unspoken truth. The dream had died with Horus. In the far reaches of the galaxy, the traitor Primarchs built empires of their own. Their names became myths, whispered in fear by men who could no longer tell gods from monsters. Horus's body was never found. Some say the Emperor destroyed it completely, erasing even his soul from existence. Others whisper that the gods of the warp keep a fragment of him, still a shard of pride preserved like an ember, waiting to ignite the universe once more. But for the sons of the Warmaster, his death was not an end. It was a beginning. Abaddon gathered the remnants of the sons of Horus, reshaping them into the Black Legion. His purpose was not redemption, nor vengeance. It was continuation. The galaxy was promised to us, he declared, and we will take it, piece by piece, until even the Emperor's corpse kneels before our war. And so began the Black Crusade's wars without end, each one a reminder that the wound of the heresy had never healed. 10,000 years later, the Imperium endures not through faith, but through inertia. Its cities stretch across 1,000,000 worlds, their skies dark with smoke and prayer. Its people live and die without ever knowing light. Its armies fight wars they no longer understand. Every victory is measured in extinction. Every peace is just a pause between screams. And still, upon the golden throne, the Emperor watches. Some say his mind is gone scattered among the stars, bound eternally to the machine that sustains him. Others claim his spirit still whispers through the warp, guiding psychers, saints, and madmen. And there are those who believe that even now, he dreams waiting for the day when he might rise again and end the long night his children began. Far from Terror, in the Eye of Terror, the Warmaster's shadow lingers. In the endless storms of the warp, where time itself folds like wounded flesh, a voice sometimes echoes proud, sorrowful, defiant. Father, was I wrong? No answer comes. Only silence. Only war. And in that silence, mankind endures broken, immortal, unworthy, yet still reaching for the stars, because that is what the Emperor made them to do, and what Horus died trying to stop. The heresy ended with a son's death and a father's damnation, but its echo has never ceased. Every battle fought in the millennia since is fought in its shadow. Every cry of, "For the Emperor," carries both worship and guilt. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, no forgiveness, no end. Only the memory of a golden age that was never real, and the endless burning question that still divides gods and men alike. Was Horus truly wrong? Or was he simply the only one honest enough to see what his father had become?